So this is my digital media After Effects tips and tricks video explaining what I learned how to do. So for my Zenith project, I chose to recreate shots from different films. So for this one, I specifically was recreating a shot from a movie called Mandy. And in this shot, it's kind of trying to show this like panicky, potentially under influence effect. And so what I really wanted to do was overlay different parts of this shot and try to kind of warp the speed and play around with blurring it a little bit and making it feel kind of disorienting. So first I started off with my baseline video and I played around with colors and used the curves, color balance, hue and saturation. And the reason that I did this was that I wanted to have numerous different colors within this. When I first shot it, I only had white light, so I tried to transition between having a red and a blue light, and I did that within these different shots. And then what I did was I split up the shot and reordered it so that it would appear differently as we go through this composition. And then I pre-composed this, and in here you can see my two different layers. These are specific to the color. So this first one was a red color, and this one is specifically more of a bluish purple tone. So once I had split it up and kind of played around with that, you'll see that I have two different sorts of layers here. Within these layers, what I tried to do was play around with something called CC wide time and something called posterized time. So for this shot, I really wanted to have that really blurred effect, especially in the back. So that is why this one here has the wide time. So what this is doing, let's turn this off here. What this is doing is it's adding this very like blurred, disoriented effect, and so it's playing around with the motion. So I added something called native motion blur. You can have it on or off. And what this kind of does is when you turn this off, it adds blur over the entire video regardless of movement. So it would be useful to do this if you are in a situation where there's not a lot of movement in the video, but you still want this effect. For mine, I had a lot of movement in it, and so I wanted it to kind of match that movement, being a little bit less blurred when she's not moving and then much more blurred when she is. So that is why I did this. The forward and back steps, from what I learned from the tutorial videos, is using a higher number for the forward steps will add that much more blurred effect, and backward steps will sort of balance that out. What you can see here is if I add this to 0, it looks a little bit less smooth and it is much more defined in certain movements. And so when you add this in, it gives it a much more like blurred effect. So having a combination of the two makes it look best. Then if we look at my other shot here, I turned down the opacity on this one, which is why it looks kind of green, because that's what my composition's background is. It doesn't come out as green. But the reason that I wanted this one to be more opaque was because I really wanted it to be more, I didn't want it to be as strong, I wanted it to be more subtle. And then I applied the CC wide time on this one, but I applied it at a much lower level. So for the forward and back steps, instead of having like 10 and 5, I did 3 and 1. So it's not as defined, which you'll see looking through here. There's still that blur, but it's not nearly as significant. And this is because in the actual shot from the film, there's a layer in this that's a little bit more opaque that does not appear as disorienting. It's kind of like you're seeing what's actually happening in real time. So once I'd layered these things out, I then involved something called posterized time. I need to turn this layer back on. So when I came in here, one thing that was really interesting from what I learned is on top of adding this blurred effect, you can add something called posterized time, which pretty much allows you to change the frame rate. What I'm doing here is I'm setting the frame rate to 10, which means instead of it being a super smooth video like we're used to with our higher frame rates, what we're seeing here is it's like there are less frames in each section, meaning that it's a bit more choppy and it gives this kind of odd and disorienting look that I'm going for. So instead of it being super smooth movement, instead it's kind of this more like blocky movement, and it's not super natural. So with this, I set this to 10. If you were to turn it up, the smoother it gets, and the lower it gets, the more choppy it is because there's less frames in each second. On top of that, I decided to add a vignette, which pretty much just allows it to have a more dark or light edging on it. And I wanted it to have a darker edging on it because in the actual shot itself, the light is more centered towards the character rather than the background. So I really wanted to darken the background, especially considering she's largely positioned in the middle of the frame for the majority of it, except for moments like this.